Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku's quirk activated only when he was near death. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The first time it happened, Izuku was 7. The memory was less a narrative and more a collection of sharp, disconnected sensations. The rough texture of rooftop shingles under his small hands. The dizzying, exhilarating view of his neighborhood spread out like a toy set below. The thrill of pretending he was all might, surveying his city. Then the slip, the scrape of his fingers against the gutter, a desperate, failed attempt to hold on. The stomach-lurching sensation of falling, the wind a hollow roar in his ears. The world became a meaningless blur of blue sky and brown earth rushing up to meet him. Then blackness. A deep, silent, and profound void. It wasn't sleep, it was an ending. He felt his own smallness in the face of that absolute nothing, and then the pain. It was not the pain of impact. It was the pain of rebirth, a searing, electrical agony that ripped through the void. A light, not white but a violent, verdant gold, erupted behind his eyes. It felt like his every cell was being torn apart, and simultaneously slammed back together by a blacksmith's hammer. He felt the phantom sensation of his bones, shattered and splintered, being fused into place by raw heat. He felt his heart, which he hadn't realized had stopped, jolt back into life with a force that should have cracked his ribs. He woke up on the grass behind his apartment building, gasping, a single, agonizing scream tearing from his throat. The world was too bright. Every sound was an explosion, and his entire body throbbed with a pain so deep it felt ancient. He was covered in dirt and a few scrapes, but he was alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and hushed, worried voices. The doctors were baffled. The boy fell 3 stories, a man in a white coat said, his voice muffled as if coming from underwater. He shouldn't be sitting up asking for Katsudon. Every skin we run comes back clean, save for some residual bioelectric energy we can't explain. It's as if his body sustained catastrophic trauma and then instantly, violently, healed itself. His mother, Inko, was a wreck of tears and trembling hands. She held him so tightly he could barely breathe, her relief a tangible, desperate force. But later, when the doctor took her aside, Izuku overheard the words that would define his life. Midoriya-san, it seems your son is not quirkless after all, the doctor explained, his tone a mixture of awe and clinical concern. He appears to possess a highly conditional and volatile survival quirk, a reactive type. It seems to activate only in response to what the body perceives as a fatal or near-fatal event. It's a last resort. A biological panic button of immense power and immense risk. We don't know the long-term cost of triggering something so powerful. It's not regeneration in the traditional sense, it's more like a traumatic reset. Frankly, it's a miracle the activation itself didn't kill him. His mother's relief curdled into a new, more profound terror. She looked at him not as a late bloomer, but as a boy with a time bomb strapped to his chest. From that day on, every scraped knee, every stumble, every cough was met with a spike of her fear. Her love became a cage of cotton wool, designed to keep him safe, to keep him from ever getting close to that terrible brink again. Izuku learned his lesson. His dream of being a hero didn't die, but it was poisoned. To be a hero was to risk one's life. For him, risking his life meant unleashing a monster of pain and light that terrified him more than any villain. His quirk wasn't a gift. It was a curse he could only wield by dying. 10 years later, the morning of the UA High entrance exam, the old fear was a cold knot in Izuku's stomach. He stood in front of his bedroom mirror, tugging at the collar of his uniform. His gaze drifted down to his chest. He pulled the fabric taut, and for a moment, he could see them. They were faint now, faded to silvery whispers against his skin, but they were there. A latticework of old scars that mapped the accidents of his childhood, the fall from the roof, a near drowning at a riverbank, a horrifying encounter with a speeding bicycle that had sent him into the path of a car. Each one a story of a trip to the brink. Each one a reminder of the price. His quirk, which he'd morbidly named Last Stand in his notebooks, was his darkest secret. To the world, including his tormentor Katsuki Bakugo, he was still just Deku. Quirkless. Useless. It was safer that way. The diagnosis was sealed in his medical records, a ticking time bomb he prayed no one would ever have cause to look up. Izuku! You'll be late. His mother called from the kitchen. Her voice was bright, but he could hear the familiar tremor of anxiety beneath it. Exam day. A day for showcasing power, for recklessness, for pushing limits. Everything she feared. Coming! He shouted back, forcing a smile onto his face that felt like a cheap mask. He had a plan. A stupid, desperate, and likely doomed plan. He had spent the last 10 months not just cleaning Dagoba Municipal Beach, but training his body to its absolute peak. He ran until his lungs burned, lifted until his muscles screamed. He had also studied. He devoured every textbook, every hero analysis forum, every piece of data he could find. He aced the written portion of the exam. He was sure of it. His mind was his weapon. It had to be. The practical exam was the true test. He couldn't afford a single villain point. Not the way they were earned. He couldn't smash robots. He couldn't engage in flashy combat. To use Last Stand, he would need to put himself in a position to be torn limb from limb. That wasn't a strategy. It was suicide. So, his plan was this: rescue points. The holy grail for applicants with non-combative quirks. He would focus entirely on helping others, on being a support unit. He would be so undeniably heroic in his actions that they had to let him in. He arrived at the massive gates of UA, his heart hammering against his ribs. The air was electric with the ambition of hundreds of hopeful teenagers, all buzzing with power and confidence. He saw kids with wings, kids with metallic skin, kids whose hands sparked with energy. He felt like a mouse that had wandered into a pride of lions. Out of my way, Deku. The voice, harsh and familiar, cut through his anxiety and replaced it with a spike of pure dread. Bakugo shoved past him, not even bothering to look at him. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, but Izuku could practically feel the explosive power simmering under his skin. Bakugo's very existence was a reminder of everything Izuku wasn't. He was powerful, confident, and he could use his quirk without having to flirt with a coroner's slab. Inside the auditorium, President Mick's booming voice did little to soothe his nerves. The explanation was simple: a 10-minute mock battle and a massive urban cityscape. 1, 2, and 3-point robots. Easy, medium, hard. Smash them, get points. And what about the fourth type of robot? A tall, blue-haired boy with engines in his calves asked, chopping the air with his hand. On the printout, it's listed as being worth 0 points. Surely, this is a misprint on UA's prestigious materials. No misprint. Examinee 7111. President Mike screeched. The 0-pointer is more of an obstacle. A gimmick. Think of it like a stage boss in a video game you're supposed to run away from. I recommend you avoid it. Izuku's blood ran cold. An obstacle you were supposed to run from. That sounded big. That sounded dangerous. His mantra for the day solidified: *avoid danger. Help people. Stay alive. When the gates to Battle Center B slid open, Izuku was the only one who started running immediately. There's no countdown in a real fight, he muttered to himself, sprinting into the foe's city as others looked on in confusion. The next 10 minutes were the most frantic and humiliating of his life. The city was a sprawling maze of concrete and steel, and the air was filled with the sounds of explosions, crashes, and triumphant yells. Robots swarmed the streets. A 1-pointer lunged at him, its single red eye glowing. Izuku yelped and dove into an alleyway, his heart pounding. He couldn't fight it. A kid with laser fingers zipped past and decapitated it in a flash of light. Thanks for the point, he yelled over his shoulder. Izuku's plan was failing. Spectacularly, he saw a boy with a hardening quirk about to be blindsided by a 2-pointer. Behind you! Izuku screamed. The boy spun, hardened his arms, and shattered the robot's chassis. He glanced at Izuku, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes before he ran off in search of more points. 0 points, Izuku's mind supplied, a grim internal scorekeeper. He pushed a girl with a vine hair quirk out of the way of a collapsing piece of rubble from a building Bakugo had just blown a hole in. She used her vines to stabilize the structure, saving others below. She gave him a quick, "Thank you." Still 0 points. He spent the minutes like a ghost, flitting through the chaos. He pointed out structural weaknesses, shouted warnings, and pulled people from harm's way, but he never laid a hand on a single robot. He was a sheep trying to herd wolves. The other applicants were so focused on their own scores that his contributions were fleeting, momentary advantages they capitalized on before moving on. He wasn't a hero. He was a helpful bystander, and Yui wasn't looking for bystanders. Panic began to set in, cold and sharp. His lungs burned, his legs ached. He could hear President Mick's voice echoing from unseen speakers. 6 minutes remaining, 6 minutes to prove he was worthy. He saw a cluster of one-pointers down a narrow street. Maybe if I can find a pipe, a piece of rebar. He ducked behind a car, his eyes scanning for anything he could use as a weapon. It was hopeless. He was a quirkless kid with a stick against an army of robots. He saw the kind, brown-haired girl from the entrance. She was touching robots, causing them to float helplessly into the air before releasing them, sending them crashing to the ground. It was an amazing quirk. She was racking up points. She looked determined, focused. He felt a pang of bitter envy. 3 minutes. The desperation was a physical thing now, clawing at his throat. He was going to fail. After all the training, all the studying, all the secret, terrified hope, he was going to fail. He leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, the sounds of battle fading into a dull roar of his own failure. Maybe Bakugo was right. Maybe he really was just a Deku. And then the ground began to shake. It wasn't a tremor. It was a rhythmic, earth-shattering thump, 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 that vibrated through the soles of his shoes and up into his teeth. A shadow fell over the street, vast and absolute. Izuku looked up, and his blood turned to ice. The 0-pointer. President Mike had called it an obstacle. That was like calling a tsunami damp. The robot was colossal, a titan of dark green metal that dwarfed the surrounding multi-story buildings. Its head scraped the sky, a single, malevolent red camera eye scanning the cityscape. It moved with a slow, ponderous gait, its every step crushing cars and cracking the pavement. Panic erupted. The confident shouts of the other applicants turned into screams of genuine terror. "Run! It's the 0-pointer! Get away!" They scattered like insects. And Izuku, remembering the advice, turned to run with them. It was the logical thing to do. The smart thing. The safe thing. He took 2 steps before a pained cry cut through the din. "Ow! I'm stuck!" Izuku whipped his head around. It was the brown-haired girl. Uraraka. She was on the ground, trapped. A large slab of concrete, dislodged by the robot's advance, had pinned her leg. She was struggling, her face pale with pain and fear, trying to push it off, but it was too heavy. And she was directly in the path of the approaching giant. The world seemed to slow down. The shouting, the explosions, the rumbling footsteps, it all faded into a distant hum. Izuku saw only her. The girl who had been kind to him, who had wished him luck. The girl who was about to be crushed. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. The frantic, terrified boy vanished. The panic, the desperation, the fear of failure, it all evaporated, burned away by a sudden, chilling clarity. A cold, hard certainty settled in his bones. He remembered All Might's words after the sludge villain incident, a memory he treasured and hated in equal measure. Asterisk. You too can become a hero. Asterisk. He remembered the doctor's warning. Asterisk. A traumatic reset. Asterisk. He remembered his mother's terrified face. He looked at the girl. He looked at the robot. He did the horrifying calculus in his head. There were no rescue points for this. There was no clever strategy. There was no time for a plan. There was only one resource he possessed that was powerful enough to change the outcome. His own life. The decision was not made in a flash of heroic fury. It was a conscious choice, cold and deliberate as a surgeon's cut. A transaction. His body for her life. A worthy trade. He stopped thinking. He started moving. He didn't run at the robot's legs or torso. He ran towards a pile of debris directly in its path, his eyes locked on the swing of its massive arm. He knew what he had to do. His quirk wasn't a weapon he could aim. It was a bomb he had to be at the center of. The activation condition was absolute, near-fatal trauma. He had to provide the catalyst himself. Bakugo, from a safe distance, saw the insane sprint. "What is that idiot doing?" he snarled, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Is he trying to get himself killed?" The other applicants who saw it just thought he was a fool, making a suicidal, pointless charge. Uraraka saw him coming, her eyes widening in confusion and terror. "No, run away! You'll be killed!" she cried, her voice cracking. Izuku didn't hear her. He reached the pile of rubble just as the zero-pointer's colossal fist began its downward swing, aimed not at him, but at the street beyond. It was perfect. The shockwave and resulting shrapnel would be enough. He planted his feet, turned his back to the impact zone, and braced himself. He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom." The world ended in a symphony of noise and pain. The shockwave hit him like a physical wall, throwing him forward. Before he could even process that, a slab of reinforced concrete the size of a car door, hurtled by the blast, slammed into his back. He heard his own spine snap. The sound was wet and definitive, an internal crack that echoed in his skull. An agony unlike anything he had ever known, even in his past experiences, erupted from his core. His legs went numb, useless. Another piece of debris caught his left arm, shattering the bone. His vision swam with black spots. The impact threw him through the air, and he landed in a heap, his body a broken puppet. He felt the warm, coppery rush of blood filling his lungs. Asphyxiation. Organ rupture. Massive spinal trauma. Cardiac arrest was imminent. The system check was complete. Activation conditions met. The world went silent and black. He was back in the void, the place between heartbeats, the precipice of death. And then the light. A torrent of brilliant, searing, green-gold energy erupted from his broken body. It wasn't a glow. It was an explosion of pure power. The bioelectric light poured from his eyes and mouth, tracing glowing, jagged lines over his skin where his bones were broken, where his organs were failing. The pain was transcendent, a cleansing fire that burned away the concept of injury, replacing it with raw, untamed force. From the ground, what the other students saw was horrifying and beautiful. The broken, motionless form of the green-haired boy suddenly detonated in a pillar of light. The light was so bright it forced everyone to shield their eyes. Izuku pushed himself to his feet. His legs, moments ago useless, were now conduits of crackling energy. His shattered arm was held together by a shimmering gauntlet of light. He could feel his vertebrae grinding as the energy forced them into a crude, functional alignment. He wasn't healed. He was being puppeted by the raw force of his own survival instinct. He looked at the zero-pointer, and for the first time, he saw it not as an insurmountable obstacle, but as a target. He didn't jump. He launched. The ground beneath his feet cracked as he exploded upwards, a human missile wreathed in a corona of destructive green-gold energy. He covered the 100-foot distance to the robot's head in less than a second, leaving a shimmering green trail in his wake. He didn't shout a heroic battle cry. A raw, inhuman roar of pure agony and power tore from his throat. He drew back his left arm, the one that had been shattered, now a cage of blinding light holding broken bone and shredded muscle together, and punched. The impact was apocalyptic. There was no metallic clang of metal on metal. There was only a deafening crack boom as Last Stand's raw energy met the zero-pointer's head. The robot's entire upper torso was vaporized in an expanding sphere of emerald light. The energy didn't just break the metal, it unmade it, the shockwave rippling down the giant's body, causing it to buckle and fold in on itself. For a single, silent moment, Izuku hung in the air where the robot's head used to be, a terrifying angel of destruction against the sky. Then, the light began to fade, and as the brilliant green-gold aura receded, the price became horrifyingly clear. The energy that had held him together vanished, and gravity took hold. He fell from the sky, tumbling like a ragdoll. The auras holding his body together flickered and died. The temporary fusion of his spine gave way. The support in his arm disintegrated. All the pain he had bypassed came rushing back, a tidal wave of agony 1,000 times worse than the initial impact. He hit the ground with a sickening thud, his body twisting at an angle that was fundamentally wrong. His left arm was a mangled ruin of purple and red, bent in two places it shouldn't be. Both of his legs were twisted and broken. He lay in a growing pool of his own blood, gasping, each breath a wet, rattling struggle. His vision was a blurry tunnel. The battlefield was silent. The other applicants stared, their jaws hanging open. The awe at the display of power had been replaced by sheer, undiluted horror at the result. Bakugo's face was pale, his usual sneer gone, replaced by a look of stunned dread. Uraraka, now free from the rubble, could only stare at the boy who had just annihilated the monster and himself to save her. Time's up. Present Mick's voice screeched, but it lacked its usual energy. It was shaky, uncertain. Footsteps rushed towards him. An old woman in a hero costume, recovery girl, knelt beside him. Her usual brisk demeanor was gone. She put a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with professional horror. "Good heavens," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This isn't backlash. This is self-mutilation." She looked at his twisted limbs, the unnatural angle of his back. These weren't the injuries of a quirk going out of control. These were the injuries of someone who had been hit by a train. And then, somehow, had won the fight. She leaned in, placing her lips on his forehead. Her quirk flooded his system, accelerating his body's natural healing. But it was a struggle. His life force was dangerously frayed, his body was a catastrophic mess. It was like trying to stitch together a cloth that had been vaporized. Through the fog of pain, Izuku heard a faint whisper. He got the point, a 60-point takedown. And then another voice, Uraraka's. "Please, give him my points. All of them. He saved me, he had done it. He was in." The thought was distant, meaningless. His last conscious sensation was the feeling of his own brokenness, the deep, rattling throb of a body pushed past the brink and dragged back by a curse. The victory tasted like ash and blood. He had paid the price for his dream, and as the world finally faded to a peaceful, welcome black, he knew, with chilling certainty, that he would have to pay it again. The first thing Izuku became acquainted with upon his return to the conscious world was not relief, but a deep, resonant ache. It was a symphony of pain, conducted from a phantom podium in the center of his being. His arm, his back, his legs, they were no longer his. They were foreign objects, badly stitched onto his torso, throbbing with a memory of utter annihilation. He was in the pristine white of the Yui nurse's office. The scent of antiseptic was sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the coppery smell of his own blood that still lingered in his memory. Recovery girl, the youthful heroine, was sitting on a stool beside his bed, her brow furrowed with a concern that went far beyond her professional duties. "You're awake," she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it in interviews. "Don't try to move. Your body has undergone significant trauma." The girl. "Uraraka-san, is she okay?" Izuku rasped, his throat feeling like sandpaper. Recovery girl's expression softened slightly. "She is perfectly fine, thanks to you. In fact, she very gallantly tried to offer you all of her 45 points. A noble gesture, but unnecessary." She sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "Your takedown of the zero-pointer was awarded 60 points. You passed, Midoriya. You're in." The words should have been a bomb, a triumphant fanfare. Instead they landed with a dull thud in the pit of his stomach. He had won. The cost was this all-encompassing agony, this feeling of being a poorly assembled collection of broken parts. "My quirk," Recovery Girl continued, her tone becoming clinical and severe, accelerates the body's own healing process. It uses the patient's stamina, their life force, as fuel. With you, it was like trying to refuel a car while the engine was still exploding. The damage was so catastrophic, so absolute. I had to use far more of your energy than I am comfortable with just to stabilize you. Your life force is frayed, young man. Do you understand what that means? It means the next time you sustain this level of injury, it will be harder to heal. The time after that, harder still. You are walking a path that has a very definitive, and very bleak end. Izuku stared at the sterile white ceiling tiles, her words etching themselves into his soul. A bleak end. He already knew that. He had known it since he was 7. Now, it was just confirmed by a pro-hero. His acceptance letter arrived a week later. Inko cried, but they weren't the tears of pure joy he had once dreamed of seeing. They were tears of relief laced with a thick, undiluted terror. She held him, her hands tracing the faint lines of his new scars through his shirt, and he could feel her trembling. His dream was her nightmare. The 2 weeks leading up to the first day of school were a quiet, painful affair. He went through the motions of excitement, but every morning he woke up with a stiff back and a dull fire in his left arm. He learned to move in a way that minimized the jarring impacts, to smile when a sharp twinge shot up his spine. He became an expert at hiding the constant, low-level pain that was now his constant companion. He was a veteran hiding his war wounds from a world that only wanted to see the parade. Stepping into Class 1A for the first time was like walking into a lion's den wearing a suit made of meat. The whispers started almost immediately. "Hey, isn't that him? The guy who went berserk at the exam? Yeah, the one who took out the 0-pointer. They say he broke almost every bone in his body doing it. Seriously? That's insane. Is he powerful, or just crazy?" He was a curiosity. A freak show. The boy who had performed one spectacular, horrifying trick. He kept his head down, found his assigned seat, and tried to make himself as small as possible. The ache in his back flared up, a dull reminder of his ticket price into this room. He saw the girl, Uraraka, who gave him a bright, worried smile that he awkwardly returned. He saw the tall, stern boy with glasses, Ida, who approached his desk with stiff, formal movements. "Good morning," Ida said, his hand chopping the air slightly. "I am Tenya Ida from Semi-Private Academy. I must commend you on your performance in the practical exam. However, your method was reckless and illogical. To cause such harm to your own body is not the mark of a true hero, who must be able to act repeatedly and reliably." Before Izuku could stammer out a reply, a familiar, grating voice cut through the air. "Get out of my way, round face." Katsuki Bakugo shouldered past Uraraka, his crimson eyes locking onto Izuku. The usual contempt was there, but it was mixed with something else now. Something sharp and unsettled. He wasn't just looking at the quirkless, useless Deku he'd tormented for a decade. He was looking at the impossible, suicidal maniac who had done something that defied all of Bakugo's understanding of power. "So you did get in," Bakugo sneered, his voice low and dangerous. "Guess they'll let any suicidal idiot in these days, so long as you can make a big enough mess on your way out." The barb was more pointed, more specific than usual. It wasn't just "you're weak." It was a direct reference to what he'd seen. Bakugo was trying to reconcile the image of the trembling kid he knew with the terrifying avatar of destruction from the exam. The confusion was manifesting as heightened aggression. Izuku just flinched and looked down at his desk, his hands clammy. He had no answer. The classroom door slid open, revealing a man who looked like he had just rolled out of a sleeping bag, which, it turned out, he had. "If you're here to make friends, you can pack up your things and leave." Shota Aizawa's voice was a monotone drawl, devoid of any energy, yet it commanded the room's immediate and total attention. His eyes, tired and bloodshot, swept over the class. They lingered on Izuku for a fraction of a second longer than anyone else, and in that fleeting moment, Izuku felt a chill that had nothing to do with his chronic pain. It was the feeling of being analyzed, weighed, and found wanting. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa," he said, stepping out of the yellow sleeping bag. He held up a blue gym uniform. "Put these on and meet me on the P grounds." Now, the sun was bright on the training grounds, but Aizawa's presence cast a long, cold shadow over the students' nervous energy. "A quirk apprehension test?" Uraraka asked, echoing the thoughts of the entire class. "But what about the entrance ceremony? The orientation?" "We don't have time for pointless ceremonies," Aizawa stated flatly. UA's selling point is how unrestricted its traditions are. That's how teachers run their classes as well. You've all been using your quirks since junior high, but you've been doing it without a proper understanding of your foundational physical abilities. This test is designed to gauge your potential." He turned his gaze, and this time it settled directly on Izuku. The entrance exam was not rational enough. The person with the highest score, Bakugo, knows his limits. He knows his power, but others pass by a fluke. One explosive, Uncontrollable act does not make a hero. A hero needs to be useful more than once. They need control. Rationality. Every word was a precision-guided missile aimed straight at Izuku's insecurities. Aizawa had seen his file. He had seen the score, 0 points, 0 points, 0 points, then a sudden 60-point spike accompanied by a medical report that probably read like a car crash victim's. He saw Izuku not as a budding hero, but as a dangerous anomaly. A one-trick pony whose one trick was to shoot himself out of a cannon. Last place will be judged to have no potential, Aizawa declared, his tired eyes scanning the shocked faces of the students. And will be expelled immediately. A wave of panic washed over the class. Expulsion? On the first day. But for Izuku, the panic was of a different sort. It wasn't the fear of failing. It was the fear of being forced into a position where he might have to succeed. He couldn't. He wouldn't. The memory of Recovery Girl's words, of the all-consuming pain, was still too fresh, too raw. He had to get through this day as a normal, quirkless boy. Even if it meant he was sent home. Expulsion was better than another trip to the brink. Test 1, 50-meter dash. Ida went first, his calf engines roaring to life. He crossed the line in 3.04 seconds. Bakugo used his explosions to propel himself, finishing in 4.13 seconds with a savage grin. Azuritsuyu, with her frog-like abilities, bounded across in 5.58 seconds. Then it was Izuku's turn, lined up against a boy with a bird head. Izuku took a deep breath, focusing on the 10 months of grueling physical training. He pushed off the starting block, his legs pumping, his lungs working. He ran as fast as his patched-together body would allow. His time, 7.02 seconds. It was a respectable time for a fit teenage boy. In this company, it was pathetic. The bird-headed boy finished a full second and a half ahead of him. A ripple of confusion went through the students. Wasn't he the one? I thought he was super fast. Maybe he can only use it in short bursts? Izuku ignored them, his heart sinking as he saw his name appear near the bottom of the digital scoreboard Aizawa projected. Test 2, grip strength. He walked up to the machine, his left hand, the arm he had used to punch the robot, flexing nervously. A ghost of the shattering pain flared up his nerves. He took the device in his right hand instead and squeezed with all his might. The muscles he had built strained, but there was a weakness, a deep-seated fragility in his bones that hadn't been there before. The machine beeped. 56 kilograms. He glanced over and saw the tentacled boy, Shoji, holding a device in each of his 6 hands, all reading over 540 kilograms. Izuku's name sank lower on the list. The whispers grew more pointed. This wasn't just an off day, this was a pattern of mediocrity. Test 3, standing long jump. Aoyama, the boy with the naval laser, propelled himself clear across the sandpit. Bakugo used his explosions again. Uraraka touched her clothes to make herself lighter, sailing over with ease. Izuku took a running start, bent his knees, and jumped. He landed with a jarring thud squarely in the middle of the sand. The impact sent a jolt of sharp pain up his spine, and he had to bite back a wince. He quickly scrambled out, trying to look unaffected, but he could feel Aizawa's analytical gaze on him. He wasn't just observing, he was dissecting. The leaderboard updated. Izuku Midoriya was now in dead last. 20th place. The humiliation was a physical weight. He could feel the pitying looks from Uraraka, the smug contempt from Bakugo, the confusion from everyone else. He was the school's biggest enigma, a walking contradiction, the boy who could level a skyscraper but couldn't jump over a sandbox. He trudged through the remaining tests in a daze of failure. The side-to-side steps were agony on his ankles. The seated toe touch made his back scream in protest. On the surface, he was a slightly awkward, physically fit but unremarkable boy. Internally, he was fighting a war on 2 fronts, managing the chronic pain that was the price of his admission, and suppressing the rising tide of panic as Aizawa's threat of expulsion became more and more real. Finally, only one test remained. The ball throw. Aizawa held up a softball. All right, last one. Uraraka stepped up to the circle. She touched the ball, wound up, and threw. Aizawa showed the class her score on his phone. An infinity symbol. Infinity? The class gasped. Amazing! Izuku watched, his stomach a cold, hard knot. He knew what was coming. This was the test where he had seen All Might do the impossible on that first day of training. A test of raw, explosive power. A test he was designed to fail. Midoriya. Aizawa's voice was flat. Your last. Step up. Izuku walked into the chalk circle, his footsteps feeling unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. He took the ball from Aizawa. It felt heavy in his hand, a sphere of judgment. He could feel every eye in the class on him. They were all waiting. Waiting for the explosion of light. Waiting for the monster from the entrance exam to finally show itself. Bakugo was practically vibrating with anticipation, a predatory grin on his face. Come on, Deku, he muttered under his breath, show 'em your pathetic party trick. Show 'em how you have to kill yourself just to be noticed. Aizawa's gaze was like a physical weight. You understand your situation, don't you, Midoriya? You are in last place. Unless you produce a score befitting a hero student, you will be going home. This is your last chance to prove you belong here. The pressure was immense. Expulsion. The end of the dream. Everything he had suffered for, gone. A desperate, treacherous thought flickered through his mind. Maybe just a little? If I just break a finger, like All Might suggested in his video? He gripped the ball, his knuckles white. He focused, trying to channel that feeling, that precipice. He imagined the bone in his index finger snapping, the sharp, clean pain. He braced himself for the rush of power. Nothing happened. The chilling reality of his own biology crashed down on him. Last Stand wasn't a tool. It was a failsafe. A broken finger wasn't a life-threatening injury. A sprained ankle, a deep cut, none of it was enough. His quirk didn't respond to pain, it responded to death. The activation condition was absolute. To get the power, he would have to pay the full price. He would have to let someone, or something, shatter his arm, crush his chest, stop his heart. There was no discount. No bargain bin version of his power. It was all or nothing, and he couldn't. He wouldn't. Not for a ball throw. Not for a grade. The phantom pains in his body screamed in protest at the very idea. His shoulders slumped. There was only one option left. He took a deep breath, pushing aside the fear and the humiliation. He focused on the memory of the past 10 months. The grueling work, cleaning the beach, lifting rusted refrigerators, pulling tires through the sand. The raw, quirkless strength he had painstakingly built with his own sweat and effort. It was all he had. He reared back, his form a perfect mimicry of All Might's. He put every ounce of his natural strength, every bit of his desperation, into the throw. His arm whipped forward, and he released the ball with a yell that was more frustration than power. The ball sailed through the air. It flew with decent speed, a respectable arc, and landed with a soft puff of dust far, far short of the horizon. Aizawa held up his phone. 46 meters. A dead silence fell over the field. It was the most anticlimactic moment imaginable. The whisper started again, this time laced with finality. 46 meters? That's it. He's really got nothing. So the exam was just a fluke. A one-time thing. Bakugo stared, his mouth slightly agape. His anticipation curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. It was the rage of a mystery being solved in the most boring way possible. He had expected a monster, a rival, something to make sense of the impossible thing he had witnessed. Instead, all he got was Deku. Pathetic, useless, quirkless Deku, who had somehow managed to fool everyone, including himself. DKU! He roared, lunging forward, his hands already sparking. You'd better start explaining, you bastard! What was the exam then, huh? Before he could take 2 steps, he was wrapped in Aizawa's capture weapon, the carbon fiber alloy tightening around him. Stand down, Aizawa said, his eyes glowing a menacing red, his hair floating. Don't make me use my quirk so much. I have dry eye. He released a fuming Bakugo and turned off the scoreboard. Alright, test's over. The results are up. And by the way, he said, a lazy, cruel grin spreading across his face, I was lying about the expulsion. The class erupted in a mixture of relief and outrage. It was a logical ruse, Aizawa explained, to draw out the upper limits of your quirks. Of course it was a lie. A girl with a large black ponytail, Jayorozu, exclaimed. It was entirely irrational to expel a student on the first day. As the others chattered in relief, Izuku felt a cold dread settle over him. He knew he wasn't off the hook. Midoriya. Aizawa's voice cut through his thoughts. Stay behind. The rest of you, head back to the classroom. The other students filed away, casting curious and pitying glances back at him. Uraraka gave him a worried look before Ida gently guided her away. Soon, it was just the two of them on the silent training ground. Aizawa walked over to him, his hands in his pockets. The tired act was gone. His eyes were sharp, analytical, and deeply serious. Your file is an enigma, Midoriya, Aizawa began, his voice low. Top scores on the written exam. A deep and insightful analysis of heroics that impressed even Nizu. And then, the practical, 0 villain points. According to multiple eyewitnesses, you spent the entire exam avoiding conflict and helping others in minor ways. Then, in the last minute, you performed an act of suicidal recklessness, unleashing a level of power that is frankly absurd, and in the process, sustained injuries that should have killed you, or, at the very least, crippled you permanently. He paused, his gaze boring into Izuku. Today, you showed me nothing. Less than nothing. You performed like a quirkless child playing dress-up. Izuku's head hung low, his fists clenched at his sides. I'm still learning to control it, he mumbled, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. Don't lie to me, Aizawa said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, but carrying more menace than a shout. This isn't an issue of control. A lack of control means you break a finger when you meant to just tap something. It means you accidentally set a tree on fire. It does not mean you systematically obliterate your own body. I've read your medical files, the ones from before you. A fall from a roof at age 7. A near drowning at age 9. A traffic accident at 12. Each one followed by a miraculous recovery from otherwise fatal trauma, and a strange, lingering bioelectric signature. There's a pattern, Midoriya. A horrifying one. Izuku's blood ran cold. He knew. He didn't know everything, but he had pieced together the most terrifying part. You have a quirk you can't use, Aizawa stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Not without almost dying first. That's the condition, isn't it? The brink of death. Izuku couldn't speak. He could only stare at the ground, his body trembling. The secret he had guarded for a decade, laid bare by this terrifyingly perceptive man. Aizawa sighed, a long, weary sound of profound disappointment. The expulsion was a ruse for everyone else. For you, it was a very real possibility. I brought you out here today to see if there was anything else to you beyond that one, self-destructive act. To see if you had any control, any utility, any rational approach to your own power. You don't. He took a step closer. I'm not going to expel you. Not yet. Because the fact remains that you saved that girl's life, and you passed the exam on a technicality. But you need to understand this very clearly. Yui is not a place for martyrs. We are not here to train children to throw their lives away for a single moment of glory. That's not heroic. It's a tragedy waiting to happen. It's a waste. I am not a heroics teacher, so I can write letters of condolence to parents, Aizawa finished, his voice hard as steel. You are on the thinnest possible ice, Midoriya. I will be watching your every move, and if I ever see you pull a stunt like the one in the entrance exam again, if you so much as think about intentionally putting yourself in the morgue to activate your quirk, I will personally see to it that you are removed from this school before you can become a statistic. He turned and walked away, leaving Izuku standing alone in the center of the circle, shivering in the warm sun. The threat wasn't a punishment, it was a promise. Aizawa hadn't seen a student with potential. He had seen a child with a curse, and he was determined to stop him from using it. Izuku finally looked up, his eyes filled with a terror that went beyond the fear of failure. He had made it into his dream school. But he was trapped between his own self-destructive power, and a teacher who was too smart, too rational, and too caring to let him use it. The path forward was no longer just about becoming a hero. It was about surviving his own salvation. The weight of Shota Aizawa's final words pressed down on Izuku long after he'd left the training grounds. It was a different kind of pressure than the near-death experience of the entrance exam. That had been a physical, explosive force, a supernova of pain and power. This was a cold, quiet weight, the kind that settles deep in your bones and chills you from the inside out. U.A is not a place for martyrs. It's a tragedy waiting to happen. He walked through the now empty school corridors, his gym uniform feeling like a costume for a part he wasn't qualified to play. His back ached with a familiar, dull throb. Each step was a quiet reminder of the price he had paid to get here, a price his own homeroom teacher had just deemed a tragic waste. He needed to see him. He needed the one anchor he had in this terrifying new world. He changed back into his school uniform, his movements stiff and automatic, and made his way to the place where his impossible journey had truly begun. Dagoba Municipal Beach. The salty air did little to clear his head. The beach was pristine, a testament to 10 months of backbreaking, quirkless labor. But as he stood there, watching the waves gently kiss the shore, his mind didn't linger on his accomplishment. It drifted back to the day it all started, the day he had met All Might, not as a fan meeting his idol, but as a problem meeting its horrified witness. Flashback. 10 months prior, the sludge villain was a suffocating nightmare of mud and desperation. Its slimy tendrils were wrapped around Bakugo, forcing their way into his mouth and nose. Bakugo, for all his explosive power, was helpless. He thrashed, setting off uncontrolled blasts that did more to endanger the surrounding heroes than his captor. Death Arms, Kamiri Woods, Mount Lady, they were all there, but they were all stymied, unable to act without risking the hostage's life. Izuku stood in the crowd, his yellow backpack clutched in his white-knuckled grip. He was frozen, just like everyone else. He saw the fear in Bakugo's eyes, a raw, primal terror he had never seen on his childhood friend's face before. And in that moment, Izuku's legs moved before his brain could protest. It was a stupid, reckless, useless act. He ran, zigzagging through the chaos, and threw his backpack. It struck the villain in the eye, a momentary distraction. He clawed at the sludge, trying to get a grip, trying to pull Bakugo free. Deku? What the hell are you doing here? Bakugo choked out. Get away, my legs just started moving. Izuku screamed back, tears streaming down his face. I don't know why. You looked like you were asking for help. The villain, enraged by the distraction, reformed its eye and roared. It swatted Izuku away not with a gentle push, but with the full force of a thick, heavy pseudopod. The blow caught him square in the chest. He flew backward and slammed into the brick wall of a nearby building with a sickening crunch. Pain, sharp and blinding, erupted in his ribs. The air was driven from his lungs in a single, ragged gasp. Black spots danced in his vision. He slid down the wall, his head lolling. The suffocation he felt wasn't from sludge, but from the crushing weight on his chest and the certainty that his lungs were no longer working correctly. He was drowning on dry land. It wasn't enough. The pain was immense, but his body, his cursed, stubborn body, knew the difference between agony and oblivion. Last Stand remained dormant, a silent monster watching him die. But then, from the crowd, a figure finally moved. A skeletal man, coughing blood into his hand, saw the scene with eyes that missed nothing. He saw the pros hesitating. He saw the hostage suffocating. And he saw the small, foolish, impossibly brave boy who had just been swatted aside like an insect, now struggling to push himself up, trying to rejoin the fight even with broken ribs. Pathetic, Toshinori Yagi muttered to himself, his own body screaming in protest. All of us. He felt the familiar surge, the inflation of muscle and might. I really am pathetic, he boomed, his voice now the iconic baritone of All Might, smoke billowing from his frame as he transformed. The villain didn't even have time to register the new threat before the hero was there. Have no fear. For I am here. Before Izuku's world could fade completely to black, he saw the blur of red, white, and blue. All Might grabbed Bakugo, pulling him free from the sludge with one hand. With the other, he cocked back his fist. Detroit smash. The punch changed the weather. The sheer air pressure dispersed the sludge villain into nothingness, and moments later, Rain began to fall from the clear blue sky. The aftermath was a blur. The press swarmed All Might. Paramedics rushed to Bakugo, who was coughing and furious. Another pair of medics hurried to Izuku, who was slumped against the wall, trying and failing to draw a full breath. Multiple rib fractures, possible pneumothorax, one of them said, shining a light in his eyes. We need to get him to a hospital. As they were loading him onto a stretcher, a towering shadow fell over him. It was All Might. The hero had a grim look on his face, one that wasn't meant for the cameras. That was an incredibly foolish thing you did, young man, All Might said, his voice a low rumble. They were going to let him die, Izuku wheezed, the words scraping his throat. You weren't there yet. All Might's heroic smile was gone, replaced by something more complex. He had seen the boy charge in. But he'd also seen something else. Just after the villain struck Izuku, for a fraction of a second, he had seen a faint, sickly green-gold light flicker around the boy's form. It was almost imperceptible, a brief shimmer that vanished as quickly as it appeared. The sludge villain had recoiled slightly, not from the force of the blow, but as if it had received a minor electric shock. It was unnatural. Later, after the crowds had dispersed and All Might had escaped the press, he found Izuku again. The boy had stubbornly refused the ambulance, insisting he was fine, a lie so blatant it was almost insulting. He was sitting in a quiet alleyway, clutching his side, wincing with every breath. All Might deflated back into his skeletal form with a great hiss of steam, startling the boy. After the shocking reveal of his true form and his injury, the conversation was not the one Izuku had dreamed of. That light, Toshinori said, his voice raspy. When the villain hit you. I saw it. What was that? Izuku froze. His secret, his curse, witnessed by his idol. He had no reason to lie, not to All Might. So, with trembling lips and downcast eyes, he told him everything. About the diagnosis at age 7, the doctor's words, highly conditional and volatile survival quirk. The absolute activation condition. The brink of death. He called it last stand. Toshinori listened, his already gaunt face growing paler. The heroic spirit he'd seen in the boy was suddenly cast in a horrifying new light. It wasn't just bravery. It was a deep-seated willingness to self-destruct. The boy hadn't charged in thinking he could win. He had charged in, perhaps subconsciously, knowing it was the only way to unlock his own terrible power. He looked at this frail, trembling child, who worshipped heroes so much he was willing to literally die to act like one. The words he had been about to say on the rooftop, asterisk. No, you can't be a hero without a quirk. Asterisk died on his lips. This boy had a quirk. It was just the most horrific, tragic quirk he had ever encountered. The words that came out instead were heavy with a burden he hadn't expected. Meet me at Dagoba Municipal Beach tomorrow at dawn. We have a lot of work to do. He didn't promise him he could be a hero. He promised him a chance. A chance to find a different way. Present day, Dagoba Beach. You're late, young Midoriya. The voice pulled Izuku from his reverie. Toshinori Yagi was sitting on a rusted, but now clean, guardrail, sipping from a can of coffee. He was in his skeletal form, looking more like a concerned scarecrow than the symbol of peace. Sorry, All Might, Izuku said, bowing his head. Mr. Aizawa kept me after the test. Toshinori's eyes sharpened. Oh? What about? Izuku hesitated, the shame of the day welling up. He knows. Not everything, but he figured it out. That my quirk only works when it's bad. He couldn't bring himself to say the words near death. He told me if I ever use it like I did in the entrance exam again, he'll have me expelled. Toshinori sighed, a long, rattling sound. I see. Shota Aizawa is a rational man. Too rational, sometimes. But he is not wrong to be concerned. He slid off the guardrail and walked over to Izuku, placing a bony hand on his shoulder. Which is why our training is more important than ever. Their training over the past 10 months had been unlike anything Izuku had expected. All Might had made it clear from the very first day. We are going to train you to be a hero who never has to use last stand. We are going to make that quirk your absolute, forgotten, last resort. You will rely on your mind, your body, and your heart. So they worked. Izuku had cleaned the entire beach, not just as a vessel for a new power, but as a way to build a functional, powerful physique from the ground up. But the training went deeper. Toshinori, in his skinny form, taught him the basics of hand-to-hand combat. It was awkward, clumsy. Toshinori was no master martial artist himself, relying more on overwhelming power, but he knew the fundamentals of boxing, of leverage, of how to throw a punch without breaking your own wrist. They would spar on the sand, Izuku getting knocked down again and again, but learning each time. A hero's greatest weapon is their mind, Toshinori would say, tapping his temple. They would spend hours in a small, cluttered office Toshinori rented, watching old fight footage. Not of himself. My fights are bad examples. They usually end in one punch, but of heroes like Sir Naitai, Eraserhead, and Gran Torino. They would break down the fights frame by frame. See young Midoriya? See how Eraserhead uses the environment? How he creates blind spots. He is fighting opponents far stronger than himself, but he wins through strategy and preparation. That is the kind of hero you must strive to be. The most exciting part for Izuku was the support gear. All Might had encouraged him to fill his notebooks not just with analysis of others, but with designs for himself. High-tension wire dispensers, impact-absorbing boots, reinforced gloves. He was designing a hero costume from the inside out, based on the principle of survival and support, not aggression. Today, however, Toshinori said, snapping Izuku back to the present, we focus on awareness. He led Izuku to a section of the beach near the street. Your first day at Yuri has taught you a valuable lesson. You are surrounded by overwhelming power. You cannot meet it head on. You must learn to evade, to anticipate, to be where the danger isn't. The exercise was simple and maddening. Izuku had to stand in a marked circle while Toshinori, from a distance, threw soft foam balls at him. The goal was to dodge them all without leaving the circle. It was a disaster. Izuku, lost in his own thoughts, was pelted repeatedly. The foam balls were harmless, but each one that struck him felt like a fresh failure. He was too slow, too distracted. Your mind is not here, my boy, Toshinori called out. Aizawa's words have shaken you. You are thinking about your weakness, about your limitations. I can't help it. Izuku finally burst out, stopping as a foam ball bounced off his forehead. He thinks I'm a reckless idiot. Everyone does. They see me as this time bomb. And the training, all this dodging and planning, it's great, but what happens when it's not enough? What happens when a villain like the one that attacked the USJ last year shows up? A foam ball isn't a Noma. My analysis isn't going to stop a monster that can fight you. The frustration that had been simmering for months finally boiled over. I feel like a failure, All Might. I have this incredible power, and you're teaching me how to be a hero without it. It feels like you're ashamed of it. Like you're ashamed of me? Toshinori stood silently, the bag of foam balls hanging limply in his hand. The boy's words struck him with the force of a physical blow. Ashamed? No. Terrified. Horrified. He saw the boy's heroic heart, a brilliant, shining sun. But it was trapped in a solar system designed to pull it into a black hole. He walked over to Izuku, his expression uncharacteristically somber. I am not ashamed of you, young Midoriya. I have never been more proud of a student. But I am terrified for you. He sighed. Come, walk with me. They walked along the water's edge, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Let me tell you a secret, Toshinori began, his voice barely a whisper above the waves. A secret about my own power, one for all. It is a sacred torch, passed from one generation to the next, a stockpiling quirk. I was not born with it. It was given to me. Izuku's eyes went wide. This was the secret he had revealed in the alleyway, but hearing it again still felt momentous. The day I met you, Toshinori continued, the day of the sludge villain, I had already chosen my successor. A fine young student from another school, Mirio Togata. He had the power, the skill, the heroic spirit. He was the perfect choice. He paused, looking out at the horizon. But then I met you. A boy with no usable quirk, who ran into danger when pro-heroes hesitated. A boy with a spirit so bright it was blinding. And I began to doubt my choice. But then you told me the truth about your quirk, he said, his voice darkening. And my doubt turned into a different kind of conflict. My master, Nana Shimura, the woman who gave me one for all, she died fighting a terrible villain. She passed the torch to me so that her fight could continue. The purpose of one for all is to cultivate life, to ensure that there is always a symbol of peace to stand against the darkness. It is a power of preservation. He stopped and turned to face Izuku, his eyes blazing with a desperate intensity. Your quirk, young Midoriya, Last Stand, is the antithesis of that. It is a power born only from destruction. It only works when you have failed to preserve your own life. Do you see the dilemma? To give you one for all, what would that mean? This was the question that had tormented him for 10 months. It was a constant, raging debate in his soul. Later that night, unable to sleep, Toshinori found himself outside Recovery Girl's office at UA. He knocked gently on the door. It's unlocked, Uov, came the gruff reply. I figured you'd be by after hearing about Aizawa's little test. He entered the small, quiet office. Chio Shuzenji was sitting at her desk, sipping a cup of tea. She gestured to the chair opposite her. He's a good boy, Chio, Toshinori said, slumping into the chair. It felt too small for even his skeletal frame. He has the heart of a lion, and the survival instincts of a lemming heading for a cliff, she finished, taking a sharp sip of her tea. I read Aizawa's report. And I remember the state he was in after the entrance exam. I've been a healer for over 40 years, Toshinori. I have seen the damage that powerful quirks can do. But I have never seen a quirk that requires that level of self-harm as a prerequisite. It's barbaric. But his spirit, Toshinori insisted, leaning forward. That is the vessel. That is what one for all requires. The desire to save others above all else. There's a difference between selflessness and self-destruction, she countered, her eyes sharp. That boy doesn't value his own life. You saw it in the exam. It was a calculated act of martyrdom. He put himself in a position to be killed because he believed it was the only way he could be useful. This was the crux of it. The terrible truth he had been trying to avoid. What if I could give him a different option? Toshinori asked, the words tumbling out, desperate and hopeful. What if I gave him one for all? A power he can control, a power that rewards hard work and strength, not injury. It could be his salvation, Chio. It could give him a path to being a hero without having to pay that price. Recovery Girl set her teacup down with a loud clink. Her expression was not angry, but filled with a profound, weary sadness. And what makes you think, she said softly, that he wouldn't just use your power to get himself to the brink faster and more efficiently? What happens when he's fighting a powerful villain and his 5% smash isn't enough? Do you think he'll retreat and regroup like a rational hero? Or do you think he will take a deliberate, fatal blow, knowing that his old curse and your new power will erupt in a blaze of glory that will win the fight but char his soul to cinders? Toshinori opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. She was right. He had been so focused on changing the boy's power, he hadn't considered the root of the problem, the boy himself. You'd be giving a pyromaniac a flamethrower and calling it fire safety equipment, she continued, her voice firm. The boy's problem isn't a lack of a safe quirk, Toshinori. It's a fundamental lack of self-worth. He has spent his entire life believing he is worthless, and now he has a power that only confirms that belief, that his life is only valuable in the moment he is about to lose it. Giving him more power won't fix that. It will only enable it on a catastrophic scale. She leaned forward, her gaze softening. You want to save that boy? Don't give him a new quirk. Teach him how to value the life he already has. Teach him that Izuku Midoriya is worth saving, even when he isn't throwing himself in front of a robot. The vessel isn't ready for one for all, not because his body is weak, but because his spirit, for all its brightness, is broken. Her words settled in the quiet office, heavy and undeniable. Toshinori felt a profound sense of failure. He had been looking at the problem all wrong. He was trying to repair the weapon, not the soldier. He had thought giving Izuku Ofa would be a solution, a kindness. Now he saw it would be a monumental act of irresponsible enablement. He left Recovery Girl's office with a heavy heart, but a clear path. The training had to continue as it was. He had to build Izuku up, not his power, but his confidence, his sense of self. He had to teach the boy that his mind, his strategy, and his quirkless efforts were enough. One for all would have to wait. It was the only responsible choice. The next day, Izuku met him again at the beach, his eyes still shadowed with frustration. "I thought about what you said, young Midoriya," Toshinori said, his tone resolute. "And you are right. A foam ball is not an omu. But the greatest heroes win their fights before the first punch is thrown. Through planning, through support, through an indomitable will that does not require self-immolation." He put Izuku through the paces, harder than ever before. More sparring, more analysis, more gear design. He praised every small success, every clever dodge, every insightful observation. "Excellent work today, my boy!" He boomed at the end of the session, mustering all the heroic cheer he could. "See? This is the path. You don't need to rely on that other thing. This is how you will become a true hero." He meant for the words to be encouraging. He meant to show Izuku that he believed in this version of him, the quirkless strategist. But for Izuku, the words landed like a judgment. That other thing, All Might couldn't even bring himself to name it. He saw it as a shameful disease to be managed, not a power to be understood. All this training, all this praise, it felt like a consolation prize. A pat on the head for the crippled kid who couldn't be allowed to run. He watched his mentor walk away, the hero's back ramrod straight with a conviction Izuku couldn't understand. A cold resolve settled in Izuku's heart. All Might didn't get it. Aizawa didn't get it. They saw a liability, a tragedy. They didn't see the truth, that in the moments when strategy failed, when all the planning in the world wasn't enough, Last Stand was the only thing that could make a difference. It was the only part of him that was truly powerful. He looked down at his own hands, his left arm giving a familiar, phantom twinge. They were all trying to save him from himself. But maybe, just maybe, what they saw as his curse was the only thing that could make him the hero he needed to be. He just had to prove it to them. He had to prove it to himself, and he had a sinking feeling that the upcoming battle trial would be his first, terrible chance. The announcement of the battle trial landed in Class 1A with the force of a thunderclap. All Might, in his full, glorious hero form, strode into the classroom with a booming "I am here," coming through the door like a normal person. That was anything but normal. The sheer charisma radiating from him was enough to wash away the tension from Aizawa's grueling test. For a moment, even Izuku felt a thrill of pure, unadulterated excitement. This was it. The real deal. Hero training. Then came the details. A 2-on-2 indoor battle. Heroes versus villains. The villains would guard a nuclear weapon prop, and the heroes had to either capture it or incapacitate both villains within the time limit. It was a test of combat, strategy, and teamwork. The team-ups were decided by drawing lots. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs as he reached into the box. Asterisk, please, not him. Anyone but him. Asterisk. His hand trembled as he pulled out the ball. Letter A. He looked up, scanning the room. Uraraka Ochako, the kind girl he'd saved, held up a matching ball with a bright, encouraging smile. A wave of relief washed over him. She was strong, smart, and approachable. He could work with her. Then All Might drew the villain team for their match. Team D. The names were called out. Ida Tenya, and Bakugo Katsuki. The relief in Izuku's chest evaporated, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. It felt like the universe had a sixth sense of humor. Of all the possible opponents, it had to be him. The one person who saw Izuku not as a mystery or a curiosity, but as a personal affront. The one person whose entire worldview had been shaken by Izuku's very presence in this school. This wasn't going to be a training exercise for Bakugo. This was going to be a hunt. Team A will be the heroes, and Team D will be the villains. All Might announced. Everyone else, head to the monitor room. As they walked towards the designated building, Izuku's mind was already racing. He wasn't thinking about his quirk. He couldn't. Aizawa's warning was a fresh wound, and All Might's new training regimen was a constant voice in his head. Asterisk strategy. Evasion. Use your mind, not your body. Asterisk. This was his chance to prove to them, and to himself, that he could be a hero their way. So, what's the plan, Deku-kun? Uraraka asked, her voice bubbly but with an undercurrent of genuine seriousness. She still seemed a little nervous around him, a mix of gratitude and awe that made him deeply uncomfortable. Right, a plan, Izuku mumbled, forcing himself to focus. He pulled out his notebook, which was already filled with sketches of the building layouts All Might had provided. Okay, so Bakugo, Kaken, is almost definitely going to come straight for me. He's personal. He won't care about the objective, not at first. He'll want to fight me. He looked at Uraraka. That's our advantage. He's predictable. His first move will be a direct, frontal assault. We can use that. You're the key here, Uraraka-san. Your quirk is perfect for stealth and mobility. While I keep Kaken busy, you can use your zero gravity to get past him and find the weapon. Ida-kun is fast, but he's not very mobile in tight corners. You can probably get the drop on him if you're quiet. Uraraka's eyes widened. So I'm the main offense? And you're the decoy? Exactly, Izuku said, a flicker of confidence lighting in his chest. This was what All Might had been teaching him. Analysis. Strategy. Using his allies' strengths to cover his own weaknesses. I don't need to beat him. I just need to hold him off. I just need to survive. The last two words hung in the air, heavier than he intended. Inside the building, Bakugo was practically vibrating with rage. Listen up, Four Eyes, he snarled at Ida. I don't care about the stupid bomb. Deku is mine. That damn nerd has been looking down on me my whole life, and I'm finally going to blast that smug look off his face and find out what his deal is. You just stand here and guard the fake nuke like a good little statue. Bakugo-kun, this is a team exercise. Ida protested, chopping the air with his hand. We must act as a cohesive unit to achieve victory. Your personal vendetta is illogical. Shut up. Bakugo roared, smoke pluming from his palms. Just stay out of my way. The buzzer sounded, signaling the start of the match. Izuku and Uraraka slipped inside, the metal door closing behind them with a heavy thud. The interior was a maze of concrete corridors and stark, industrial lighting. Remember the plan, Izuku whispered. He'll be coming. He didn't have to wait long. A roar echoed down the hallway, followed by the percussive boom of an explosion. Bakugo, propelled by his quirk, rocketed around the corner, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury. DKU. The attack was instant and overwhelming. Bakugo was a whirlwind of controlled violence, his explosions not just attacks but part of his movement, allowing him to change direction in midair, to dodge and weave with terrifying speed. Now Uraraka-san! Izuku yelled, pushing her towards an adjacent corridor. He dodged a wide, telegraphed right swing from Bakugo, a move he'd seen 1,000 times in their childhood fights. Don't you dare ignore me! Bakugo screamed, his rage escalating as he saw Uraraka slip away. He unleashed a blast at Izuku, who just managed to duck behind a pillar. The concrete shuddered, chunks of it raining down. This was exactly as Izuku had predicted. It was working. He was a matador, and Bakugo was the charging bull. He didn't need to fight. He just needed to keep waving the cape. He used his intimate knowledge of Bakugo's fighting style, his reliance on his right hand for big attacks, his tendency to get tunnel vision when enraged, to stay one step ahead. He dodged, weaved, and scrambled through the labyrinthine halls, with Bakugo hot on his heels. It was a terrifying, exhausting dance. Every near miss sent a jolt of adrenaline through him, but also a spike of pain from his still healing body. Stand and fight, you coward! Bakugo bellowed, his explosions echoing like cannon fire in the enclosed space. He's completely focused on Midoriya-kun, Yaoyorozu observed from the monitor room. This is a poor strategy. He's ignoring his objective and his partner. It's more than strategy for him, Aizawa commented from the back of the room, his arms crossed. He was watching the screen with an unnerving intensity. He wasn't watching the fight. He was watching Midoriya. He was watching for the telltale signs of a martyr preparing for his sacrifice. So far, the boy was holding to the plan. He was being rational. But can he keep it up? Kirishima asked, leaning forward. Bakugo's relentless. Izuku was learning that firsthand. His lungs were on fire. His back was screaming in protest. All Might's physical training had made him strong, but he wasn't built for this kind of sustained, high-intensity chase. He was flagging. He ducked into a room, trying to catch his breath, but Bakugo blasted the door off its hinges and was on him in an instant. Bakugo grabbed Izuku's arm and used an explosion to spin them both through the air, slamming Izuku into the floor. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and a blinding, white-hot pain shot up his spine. "Got you," Bakugo hissed, his face inches from Izuku's, his eyes wild. "No more running. Now you're going to tell me how a quirkless, worthless pebble like you got into UA and got a damn quirk. You've been lying to me all this time, haven't you?" "I haven't!" Izuku gasped, his vision swimming. "I wasn't lying, Kaken." The genuineness in his voice only seemed to infuriate Bakugo more. He raised his gauntlet, the one shaped like a massive grenade. A sinister, high-pitched whining sound began to emanate from it. In the monitor room, All Might's voice boomed through the intercom. "Young Bakugo, stop. Are you trying to kill him? He won't die if he dodges." Bakugo screamed back, a terrifying grin stretching across his face. He was completely unhinged. "This gauntlet isn't just for show, it stores my nitroglycerin like sweat, and I can detonate it all at once." He aimed the gauntlet not at Izuku, but at the wall behind him. "Time to see what that flashy quirk of yours can really do." He pulled the pin. Izuku's eyes widened in horror. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't a calculated move. This was pure, unrestrained annihilation. There was no dodging this. The blast would engulf the entire corridor. His mind went into overdrive. He could try to run, but he wouldn't be fast enough. He could try to shield himself, but it would be useless. And then the cold, quiet voice of his curse whispered in the back of his mind. This is it. This is the brink. Let it happen. Let the pain come. You know what to do. He saw Aizawa's disappointed face. He heard Recovery Girl's warning. A bleak end. He heard All Might's desperate plea to be a different kind of hero. No. With a surge of desperate strength, Izuku slammed his hands on the floor, pushing himself sideways just as Bakugo fired. A monumental, deafening explosion ripped through the building. The world turned white and hot. The force of the blast picked Izuku up and slammed him into the far wall. The heat was intense, searing his back through his costume. The shockwave was a physical blow to his entire body. But he had moved just enough. He was out of the direct cone of destruction. He collapsed in a heap, his ears ringing, his body bruised and battered but whole. Intact. He had survived. He had done it their way. A cloud of dust and smoke filled the corridor. Bakugo stepped through it, his face a mask of disbelief. How are you still standing? You didn't even use it. Izuku pushed himself up, trembling. Because I don't have to, he gasped, a genuine, triumphant smile on his face. I don't have to rely on it to fight you, Kaken. In the monitor room, All Might let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He did it, he whispered. He faced it down, and he didn't break. He didn't use it. Aizawa remained silent, but the rigid tension in his shoulders eased almost imperceptibly. The fight wasn't over. Bakugo, enraged beyond reason by Izuku's defiance, charged again. This time, Izuku was ready. He'd bought Uraraka enough time. Now, he just had to finish his part of the plan. As Bakugo swung, Izuku dropped low and grabbed his arm. He used Bakugo's own momentum, a move All Might had drilled into him, to flip him over his shoulder. Bakugo landed hard, stunned for a precious second. Izuku didn't press the attack. He ran. He ran back towards the central part of the building, towards the bomb. The plan's almost complete, Uraraka-san. He shouted into his comms. Where are you? 5th floor. Central pillar. I found it. Her voice came back, strained. Ida-kun is playing the part of a villain a little too well. He's cleared out the whole room, so I have nowhere to hide. Izuku looked up. The building was 5 stories tall, with a large open atrium in the center. He could see the 5th floor from where he was. He saw the glint of the prop weapon. He also saw Bakugo, recovered and flying towards him with murderous intent. There was no time. Uraraka couldn't get close to the weapon with Ida guarding it so perfectly. And Bakugo was about to corner him again. The initial plan had failed. It had been a good plan, a rational plan. But it wasn't enough. The cold calculus began again in his head. They were out of time. They were out of options. His way hadn't been enough. He looked at his arm. He looked up at the ceiling 5 floors above him. He looked at the furious, oncoming form of Bakugo. A new plan formed. A terrible, horrifying, but perfect plan. It was a calculated casualty. Kaken! Izuku yelled, turning to face him. Take this. He drew back his arm, not his mangled left, but his right. For a terrifying second, everyone in the monitor room thought he was about to unleash a real punch, a real smash. Bakugo, his instincts screaming, prepared to meet the blow head-on with an explosion of his own. But Izuku wasn't aiming at him. He was aiming at the ceiling. Uraraka-san! He screamed into the comms. Grab the pillar. Now! And make yourself weightless. He unleashed the punch. But he didn't use one for all. He didn't have it. He didn't use last stand. He wasn't dying. He just punched upward with all his might. A purely symbolic gesture. The real attack came from Bakugo. As expected, Bakugo met Izuku's attack with a massive, targeted explosion from his right hand. The resulting force of their collision was immense. But since Izuku's punch had no power, all of that force was directed upward, exactly where he had aimed. Boom! The ceiling above them, and the floor of the level above that, and the one above that, all the way to the 5th floor, erupted in a catastrophic chain reaction. The concussive force of Bakugo's own explosion, channeled by Izuku's feint, created a massive, gaping hole straight up through the center of the building. Debris rained down. Uraraka, having followed his instructions, clung to the central pillar, her quirk activated, floating safely as the floor around her disintegrated. Ida was thrown off balance by the sudden, violent tremor, and in that moment of chaos, Uraraka released her quirk on the deluge of falling concrete. It's a meteor shower! She yelled, swinging the pillar she was holding like a bat. She smashed it into the floating debris, sending a cascade of makeshift projectiles straight at Ida. Improvised super move. Comet home run! Ida, overwhelmed, could only shield himself. Hero team. Wyans! Uraraka yelled, slamming her hand onto the unguarded nuclear weapon. The buzzer sounded. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of settling dust and rubble. Down on the ground floor, Izuku lay on his back, staring up through the hole he had created. He was exhausted, bruised, and his entire body felt like one giant Charlie horse. But he was smiling. He had won. He had won without breaking a single bone. He had won without dying. He had used his mind. He had used his enemy's power against him. He had proven to All Might, to Aizawa, that he could do it. Bakugo stood a few feet away, smoke rising from his gauntlets, his chest heaving. He was staring up at the hole, then down at Izuku, his expression a maelstrom of confusion, fury, and something else, something that looked almost like fear. He hadn't been beaten by a quirk. He had been beaten by a strategy so audacious, so suicidal in its own way, that he couldn't comprehend it. Deku had used him. He had turned his own greatest weapon into the instrument of his defeat. The victory, however, was not without its price. As the adrenaline began to fade, a new sensation made itself known. The heat from Bakugo's final, massive explosion had been more intense than Izuku had realized. The back of his hero costume was scorched and melted. A deep, searing pain began to bloom across his shoulders and back. He hadn't been directly hit by the blast, but he had been caught in the splash damage. The flash burns were severe. Medbots arrived, loading a stunned Bakugo and an exhausted Ida onto stretchers. Uraraka came running down the stairs, her face smudged with dust but alight with victory. Deku-kun, we did it! That was amazing! You were amazing! Then she saw the way he was holding himself, the pained grimace on his face. Are you okay? Fine, he lied, the word automatic on his lips. Just tired. He walked stiffly to the nurse's office, refusing the Medbot's assistance. He couldn't let them see the extent of the burns. It would raise too many questions. He could handle this himself. He found himself in the same nurse's office, but this time, he didn't get on the bed. He went to a supply cabinet, his movements furtive. He pulled out burned cream and sterile bandages. He ducked into the attached bathroom, locked the door, and peeled off the remnants of his scorched costume top. He hissed in pain as he looked in the mirror. His back and shoulders were a mess of angry red flesh, already beginning to blister. It was bad. A second-degree burn, maybe worse in some spots. It was a serious injury, one that would normally require professional care. But to him, it was a victory scar. It was the acceptable cost of doing things the right way. He gritted his teeth and began to awkwardly apply the cream, hissing with every touch. This was his new reality. Managing his own pain, hiding his own wounds, all to maintain the fragile illusion of control. Later, cleaned and bandaged and back in his school uniform, he was intercepted by All Might in the hallway. The hero was in his deflated form, a worried look on his gaunt face. "Young Midoriya," he said, his voice low. "That was an exceptionally risky and destructive plan, but it worked," Izuku said, meeting his mentor's gaze. There was a new confidence there, a hard-won steeliness. "And I didn't use my quirk? Not the real one. I did what you taught me. I used my head. I used what was available." All Might stared at him for a long moment. He could see the exhaustion in the boy's eyes, but also the pride. The boy had faced his demon and won, not by exorcising it, but by outsmarting it. But the sheer level of collateral damage, the willingness to bring the entire building down on top of himself, it was still terrifying. "You have the heart of a hero, my boy," All Might said finally, a true, proud smile gracing his lips. "And the mind of a mad strategist. I am incredibly proud of you." The praise was like a balm on Izuku's soul, and on his scorched back. It was real. It was earned. But as he walked away, a solitary figure watched from the end of the hall. Bakugo. He hadn't gone to the nurse. He had stood there, silent, listening. He saw the new confidence in Deku's posture. He saw the genuine pride on All Might's face. He had lost. And he didn't understand why. He had been stronger, faster, more powerful. He had unleashed a blast that should have obliterated Deku. But the nerd had just taken it. He hadn't used his quirk. He hadn't broken. He had just endured, and then he had used Bakugo's own rage to win. Bakugo looked down at his own hands, the source of his power, the source of his pride. For the first time in his life, he felt a flicker of doubt. Power wasn't everything. And that terrified him. He saw the look in Izuku's eyes just before the final explosion. It wasn't fear. It wasn't desperation. It was a cold, unnerving certainty. It was the look of someone who had calculated the cost and had decided he was willing to pay it. It wasn't the look of a hero in control. It was the look of someone who had simply chosen a different, more clever way to sacrifice himself. Izuku may have won the battle without activating Last Stand, but in Bakugo's eyes, the suicidal maniac was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. And that was a mystery far more infuriating, and far more frightening, than any secret quirk.